Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Gregor. Gregor, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Tom. Yes, thanks for having me. Gregor, founder of Scoutbee and CEO.
Okay, Gregor. And for people who might be unaware, what is Scoutbee?
Scoutbee drives better business outcomes, and we are giving global enterprises actionable insights to perfect their supply base and help them to advance their strategic initiatives such as supply chain resilience, profitability, ESG, or innovation.
Okay. Let's dig into that in a little more detail because that's very, very high level. So, who might be a typical customer of Scoutbee and what is it you're doing for them?
Yeah, so a typical customer of us is a company above $1 billion in revenue that have different data systems that want to connect to external data points and today are driving decisions based on that data and based on incomplete data. And what we are helping companies do is aggregating data from various different sources, such as ERP, SRMs, but also the World Wide Web, and also third-party data providers such as Dun & Bradstreet, EcoVadis, and so on. And we aggregate all of this data into one singular graph. That's a new way of storing data. It can be seen as a kind of a social network representation of your supply base. And that gives a very holistic view of your supply base and gives you a contextualized picture of it. And contextualized picture, you can imagine that if you have invested in a risk solution and you have invested in a financial data provider, those are usually siloed solutions and they're not contextualized. If you now want to, however, understand what companies are at risk and how are they actually related to my internal revenue and what products do they provide, then you have to contextualize this data. And we are providing this whole data platform for this so that you have finally full visibility where you stand and where you are with your strategic initiatives. That's the first phase of it. After that, we give also the opportunity to improve your supply base with our supply discovery solution. So we help you identify weak spots in your supply base and help you to find better alternatives to constantly seek supply base perfection based on your own strategic measures.
Okay, fascinating. And what kind of outcomes are your customers typically looking for?
So the final outcome is to reach your procurement strategy, right? So the final outcome is that your supply base becomes more resilient, greener, more profitable. And that is related always to observability. So how green or resilient am I actually in a certain category? And then also actionability to say, hey, this supplier is not performing according to your standards. Here are 3 alternatives to help you actually reach your category's target regarding ESG or resilient.
Okay. And you've talked recently, and I've seen it on your website, about generative AI. Now, that's all the new hotness since ChatGPT went public last November 30th, if I remember correctly. What is it that you are doing with generative AI that can help people?
Yes. So just to get the terminologies right also for the audience. So there's generative AI, and in this field of generative AI, there are different areas. And one is large language models. And ChatGPT is a public version of one large language model that is GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 by a company called OpenAI. And what we do, or what we have been doing actually over the last 3-4 years already, we have been using large language models constantly. So large language models are quite new. However, they are not that new. They haven't been created 2022 or 23. They actually came out around 2015, 16. And we have been using those large language models actually in various different ways. The one is for extracting information from company websites, contextualizing data, merging different data records from different suppliers into one singular one. And yeah, with the new advancement, though, we have also expanded actually a lot on what we are doing with generative AI, in particular with large language models.
Okay. And in terms of functionality for your customers, how is it helping them?
Yes. So in general, those large language models have two areas, if you like. The one is direct prompting, and the other one is synthesizing data. When we actually interact with ChatGPT, it's a direct prompt. You have a direct question, and you will receive the information out of that.
Mm-hmm.
The information might be right, might be not. In the end, large language models tend to hallucinate and make up stuff. Actually, they are lying with high confidence. And however, there are typical use cases for that where you say, hey, I want to inform my category strategy a little bit, or I want to understand like how does the steel market in China look like, etc. Like, so informed decisions, right? What we see, however, as the much more powerful approach is actually using large language models to synthesize data from different sources, like internal ERPs, SRMs, etc., representing that in a way so the large language model understands it, and let the large language model help you to actually drive the right decision. However, that is the easy part, right? The more difficult part is that you have to come to a state where you have to be excellent in two things. One is excellent in aggregating data from different sources. And second, you have to be excellent in representing those data streams in a dynamic manner. And only then actually you can harvest the value that large language models actually bring to the table. Without that, large language models are knowledge bases that have been trained on public web. Those are helpful. Disconnected to the data, however, they cannot be fully utilized.
Okay. Walk me through it a little bit more, Gregor, because I'm not quite sure what you mean when you say synthesizing data. What's the value of that? What's the function of doing that? What does that do for you?
Yes. To simplify that and maybe even drop the term synthesizing, at the moment you question the large language model like ChatGPT on one data foundation, and that is the World Wide Web data that it was trained on, and books, etc. What you as a purchaser, however, want to have is you want to have the model actually access your existing data. Right. You want to make sure that if you ask, for example, things like, hey, who is my most innovative supplier or my greenest supplier in category X, it should not come up with a creative answer, right? You do not want to have creativity here, right? That's
sure.
And you avoid creativity in hardwiring the large language model to specific data points internally and tell it literally, hey, do not make stuff up. If you don't know, tell me you don't know. But there has to be a hard fact actually in this database that you are querying. And if there's no data point, simply say you don't know. And this is the major difference where you actually come to real value.
Okay, gotcha. So what you're saying is, rather than using the OpenAI ChatGPT solution, you're using a separate large language model that you have yourself, and then you seed that with your own company data, tell it not to make stuff up, and suddenly you have a ChatGPT analog which is fed all of your company data, and therefore you can apply the power of ChatGPT type large language models to your company data.
I think that's an excellent description, yes. And as a next step, then that's where synthesizing kicks in, right? That is when you have all of the data actually available, you can actually start training your large language model if it's private. So OpenAI doesn't help here. If it's private, you can start training it and make it understand actually your decision making. So it can start understanding what does a stable supplier look like. It can start understanding what does a supplier look like that might be shaky in the future, and also understand if you ask a question like, hey, my supplier A is going bankrupt potentially, can you please distribute the products of supplier A across my supply base and optimize for resilience and diversity, right? Those are things then you can actually start. And for that, you have to synthesize all the different data into the large language model. And this is then the final step. And then you have a very, very powerful AI foundation that you can keep on training. And then you have 24/7, always hardworking, know-it-all procurement assistant for your whole procurement team that can not only support decision making now, but actually can take decisions as soon as the system is fully trained.
Okay. So let me just to clarify again. I'm getting a little bit hung up, and I apologize for this. I'm getting a little bit hung up on the term synthesize, because maybe it's a technical utilization of the term, but to my understanding, when you're synthesizing something, you're making something up. I don't think that's what you're saying. I think you're saying you're actually go on.
The synthesizing AI, or synth AI, was a term that was actually coined by Andreessen Horowitz for this very specific task. Andreessen Horowitz is a quite renommed venture capitalist.
Sure.
And yes, I understand what you mean. I think what we want to say is that you have one phase where you give the large language model actually access to the data, and the next stage is actually to merge this data into the large language model. And by doing so, actually make your data part of the large language model and fine tune it on your data and enable it to take decisions based on your data.
Okay. Yeah, no, because like I said, my understanding of the word synthesize is creating something, making something up. But what you're saying is you're seeding it with actual real data. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. Thank you. And apologies for the confusion. So let's talk a little bit about that. Well, let's take a step back, because some people might be unaware. I mean, many people are coming to this very new, and the only exposure they've had to large language models is ChatGPT. But maybe just to set a bit of context, give a little bit of a backstory about how there are other large language models and what they look like, where they come from, open source, closed source, that kind of thing.
Yes. Well, the market moves at a crazy speed here. So I assume that as soon as this podcast is probably being released, there's yet another large language model coming out. There was one massive movement just after ChatGPT. Actually, the other large language model, Llama from Facebook, the weights, what is pretty much the large language models, were leaked. And based on that, there was a rapid innovation happening in the open source space, where most of the models that cannot be used actually commercially, but are equally good, actually, or can be at least be compared with ChatGPT, to a point now where there's almost no defensible mode anymore for OpenAI, also not for Google or Microsoft. The open source space has taken over the large language model innovation, and we will see more and more models come out. However, the model itself will not be a defensible mode also for you as a procurement organization going forward. It doesn't really matter which one you use, in fact, right? Those things are already so good now that even if you take a mediocre performant one, it will still feel like magic. And it will actually keep on improving over time. So at the moment, what we are using, well, I'm not going to tell what we are using, but we are using a version of also another large language model that was also that's commercially available. And we have been starting to train it on procurement and supply chain know-how, so it can be completely deployed in customer hands without any interference anymore from our side also, right? So this is then your AI, essentially. We help you to train it, etc. But like no data is actually leaving this thing. It's your AI, it's on your machine, it's your brain. And coming back to your original question, so my core message is don't worry too much around what other large language models coming out. There are so many right now out there that are already excellent and more than good enough for your use case in particular. If you talk about generating novels or pictures or videos. That's a different kind of breed. But in the space where we are in, the large language model capabilities are already more than we need.
Super, super. And if we think about procurement and supply chain, where do you see large language models having the biggest impact?
Yeah, I would probably split this in short term and long term. Long term, I totally believe, and I'm talking here 1, 2, 3 years after deploying a large language models like ours in the decision making of the system. I firmly believe that if you give and feed this data that you have actually in a meaningful way into the large language model, helping the large language model to drive the right decisions will have incredible impact. In particular, because a human is usually only able to take 3, 4, 5 different dimensions into account when taking a decision. And we usually do that by clicking around, getting to an Excel sheet, then do a Dun & Bradstreet record, then we go to the website, does the supplier for ISO 9001, and bit by bit we try to inform our decision. A large language model has multiple hundreds of dimensions actually can think of and can actually drive much better decisions if we do so. So here I definitely see a massive use case going forward. Short term is actually accessing data. So short term is how we also start with our customers is, hey, you can in a conversational way access your supply base, your existing supply base, and have a conversation with that and say, hey, what suppliers do I have that can provide X, Y, Z? And then bit by bit actually start adding data point by data point according to your strategy. And maybe at the moment your strategy is to become more resilient, then you want to have the risk data points in it. Maybe you want to have a more sustainable supply base, then you should start actually adding sustainable metrics into the large language models and bit by bit build it out here. And the biggest benefit of large language models strategically is start now, right? Get something rolling, get something using, start learning, because else you might drift into a sustainable AI disadvantage. If you start 2 years later, then your competition, you probably will never pick it up again.
Okay. There's, in the tech space, there's the idea of the bleeding edge organization, so-called bleeding edge, because you're so far ahead of everyone else, it almost causes you to bleed because you're spending a lot of money. And then there's kind of the fast followers, and then there's everybody else. And if I'm understanding you, what you're saying is you want to either be kind of close to bleeding edge or fast follower in this space. You don't want to be left behind, or because the space is moving so fast, if you don't move, you're going to be left way, way behind. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, and I firmly believe actually that there will be a sudden death of companies that have not actually adopted AI soon enough. And the impact of starting late can be actually seen right now in the market in the most brutal form. So the most innovative company in the field that have invested so much in data and AI, Google, cannot actually compete with OpenAI. They have lost this AI race, right? And OpenAI has now constant usage of the system. And even a company like Google with almost infinite resources and data cannot actually chase OpenAI anymore in a meaningful way. It's crazy. And that means for you as a company, in whatever space you are, if your 2, 3 main competitors are picking this up, it will be incredibly difficult for you to come up with an equal good solution, no matter what investment you actually put in.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean about Google, because since late last year, early this year, I haven't used Google. I've literally stopped using it. I used it all the time. I use it every day, multiple times a day for my searches. But as soon as ChatGPT came out, and then you had Bing come out with chat built into it, I've stopped using Google, because Bing, while slightly slower for a result when used Bing with chat, the result is significantly better. In Google, you get a page with 10 results. The first 3 of them are ads, and then you have to look down to see which one may or may not be applicable, and you might have to go onto a second page because the first ones are, whatever. Whereas with the Bing search, you get one result. It's generally the right result, and you've got a series of links underneath it to source material, so it's saying where it's getting the result from. It's just orders of magnitude better. And yeah, to your point, Google has been left sitting in the dust. They're going to have to do something really quick to, I'm sure they must have lost a massive amount of search traffic as a result.
For sure. And like Bing and not being able potentially in the traditional search, being able to compete with Google anymore, Bing has now actually the attraction and the usage of the users searching through conversational chat. And with actually Bing having the higher usage, it will be equally hard now for Google to chase that and to come up with a equal good offering. Almost impossible.
Yeah. Just coming back to supply chain,
right?
we're geeking out on all this stuff, but coming back to supply chain, how challenging will it be for organizations who have large legacy systems that they've invested lots of money in to transition over to using this new way of doing things? I mean, there's a lot of change management issues to go through there. There's a lot of potential trust issues and privacy issues as well when you're dealing with data, obviously. Again, we've said that it needs to be the ones who can move quickly need to move quickly because they'll be left behind. So walk me through that process. How do you think that's going to work out?
Yeah. So coming back to a statement earlier in the podcast, you have to be good in two things: aggregating data at scale from different systems, and second, representing this data. And this is hard. It's actually very hard. In particular, if you have dozens of different disconnected systems, merging those records, connecting those records, and merging it with an external Dun & Bradstreet record, reflecting this into one singular data node, etc. All of that is hard, right? So it's And there are companies out there that do that. That's us, for example, right? So we do nothing else. Our whole DNA is aggregating and representing data. This is our DNA, and this is where you have to start investing. And connecting this then in the end to a large language model is actually quite easy. That's not the hard part. You have to, of course, ideally so first, that's easy. What you need, though, you need a private large language model. You want to have this running on your instance. Second, you want to have a large language model that is trained on your space, right? So, and trained actually in your expertise. And you want to have a large language model actually that is connected to your data and actually can digest it, right? So those things also, if you go with a completely open source model that is not trained on your space, etc., it will be simply inferior. It won't be bad. It will be just not good, not better, right? So that's about it. So we have a very clear approach how we start, and that is we actually start with small use cases together with the customer. So customers give us not a lot of data, or not us, but actually feed data into the system. Not a lot of data. We usually only start actually with the company names, right? And this is already enough for our system to aggregate all the web data, including addresses and so on, and all the web content, and then connect this as a first solution actually to a conversational AI, so that the customer can already have meaningful conversations with their supply base, and then bit by bit build it out. And that is incredibly easy. And then your first AI solution will be actually live within a couple of weeks. We're not even talking months here.
Okay, and is this hosted on your infrastructure or your customer's infrastructure, or is it up to your customer to decide?
Up to the customer to decide. We don't do on-premise, so it has to be on the cloud. But in the end, it's up to the customer where to deploy it, and it can be also in a private shielded area in the cloud.
Okay, and I mean you've mentioned sustainability and ESG data as well at times in this podcast so far. How do you see these large language models helping organizations better achieve their ESG and sustainability goals?
Only when the data is connected. Else, it's just a better Wikipedia that might come up with wrong answers. So here, it won't help you a lot. It will help, however, if you have connected to your data and you have merged your internal data actually into the large language model. then the model will be able to reason actually, and also help you to optimize your supply base by, for example, saying, hey, supplier A is performing very well according to our performance standard from the supplier scorecard. The total supplier revenue is 100 million. We are only spending $2 million with a supplier, representing only 3% of the spend in this category. We can grow with the supplier and achieve our ESG goal. And this sounds very fancy, but in fact, actually, it's just connecting 3 data points and making the large language model reason that the rest. The power comes, of course, that the large language model can do this 24/7 and can start scenario planning in the background while you are sleeping or on vacation. So it's constantly helping, of course, to drive the right decisions then.
Fascinating. And where to next? I mean, we've seen these large language models kind of explode on the scene, come from kind of 0 almost to 100 in a very short space of time. We're on, in the ChatGPT space, we're on GPT-4 now. What's going to come next? What kind of features and functionality can we expect to come with subsequent versions of the large language models, or is this it?
I think this is it. So I do not see that there will be a radically better version coming out anytime soon. OpenAI did an excellent job, and I mean, it already feels like magic to us, right? And for certain things, though, large language models are simply not good at, right? When it comes to math, for example, when it comes to complex reasoning from different domains, etc. This is where large language models are not good at. And that's where we see, however, a massive innovation right now happening is with technologies and plugins, for example, ChatGPT coming out and saying, hey, how can I actually level or remove the weaknesses of the large language model by doing chain of thoughts reasoning with certain technology, or by connecting Wolfram Alpha from mathematics and maybe also from a space knowledge point of view.
Fascinating. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Gregor. Is there anything I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
I think we actually were quite comprehensive. The one piece that I would like to add is that don't hold back and simply start using it. Right. So the first simple solution that we are deploying is actually quite powerful already. Right. So it actually helps you, for example, in times of risks. Right. If a supplier goes bankrupt, you want to know, do I have a supplier that fits as an alternative in my existing supply base? And you cannot rely on the data that is sitting in your ERP or SIM, and missing out on that is actually terrible. So like having actually a conversational AI simply on just a very small data set is actually already quite powerful. So don't aim too high, right? Aim very high when it comes for your vision and your North Star, but then start simple, start lean, get your stakeholders involved to get buy-in from the organization, and then bit by bit build it out according to your internal agenda.
Okay, fascinating. Gregor, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Our website, scoutbee.com. There's also a contact form. We also actually just released our white paper on AI and large language models. So feel free to download that to get even more knowledge. And yeah, looking forward to hear from you.
Fantastic. I'll put those links in the show notes, Gregor, so everyone has access to them. Gregor, that's been great. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.